like to call this House Education Committee to order Tuesday, October 21st. And I'd like to welcome everyone attending the meeting for the three pieces of legislation that we're going to be discussing today. Thank you for taking the time to come up here. Just a few comments regarding the legislation today. We will not be taking votes today. We have a lot to cover. We're going to go through as much as we can. We have 3 items. And the next meeting, whether it be a special meeting or our next regular scheduled meeting, we will then address voting these issues on through. With that, I would just like to ask the clerk for a roll call.
President Palmer.
Here.
President Hummel.
Here.
President Meyer.
Here.
President Bradstreet.
Here.
President Hager.
Here.
President Hart. President Ruth Johnson.
Here.
President Tabor. President Voorhees.
Here.
President Vanderveen.
Here.
President Knopf.
Here.
Representative Stahl.
Here.
Representative Gillihan.
Here.
Representative Bagnazi.
Here.
Representative Spade.
Present.
Representative Smith.
Here.
President Hopgood.
Here.
President Meisner.
Present.
Representative Glass.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you very much. A correction. The first bill, the H.R. 116, the House resolution, we will be voting on that one. The other two we will not be. Before we get into discussing the legislation that we're going to look at today, I would ask for a motion to adopt the minutes of October 7th meeting. Without objection, the minutes are approved. If there's any discussion, minutes are approved. Okay. 3 pieces of legislation on the table today are House Resolution 116, introduced by Representative Sack. Also, House Bill 5059, introduced by Representative Ward, regarding the instruction programs and regarding warning signs and risk factors of suicide and depression, to include those in the curriculum in Michigan Public Schools. And thirdly, Senate Bill 366, introduced by Senator Cropsey, which will discuss mandatory professional development requirements in Michigan schools and modifications to that. The first agenda item will be House Resolution 116, introduced by Representative Sack. I would like the indulgence of the committee to, before we get into any discussion on this House resolution, is to adopt an H2 sub that you all have in front of you. It says S2, but it really is an H2 sub. That's a misnomer. We will be adopting that first, and that'll be the resolution that we'll discuss, and we'll let the representative present that. Is there a motion to adopt the H2 sub for House Resolution 116, moved by Representative Gillihan? Unless there's any discussion, just like to ask for a roll call vote on adopting the H2 sub.
To adopt the House Resolution H2, Representative Palmer.
Yes.
Representative Hummel.
Yes.
President Meyer.
Yes.
Representative Bradstreet.
Yes.
President Hager.
Yes.
President Hart. President Ruth Johnson. President Tabor. President Voorhees.
Yes.
Representative Vanderveen.
Yeah.
President Knopf.
Yes.
President Stahl.
Yes.
President Gillihan.
Yes.
President Bagnazi.
Yes.
President Spade.
Yes.
President Smith.
Yes.
President Hopgood.
Yes.
President Meisner.
Yes.
Representative Platt.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you have 16 yeas, 0 nays, and 0 passes.
Thank you very much. With that, we would like to ask Representative Sack to come up and to discuss the resolution. Welcome to House Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to address your committee this afternoon on what I believe is an extremely critical issue, along with your committee members. And I'd just like to share briefly that we know families and kids throughout the state of Michigan love Michigan apples. I think we would all agree that kids love Michigan apples. And I'll be brief in my remarks this afternoon, but what I tell you today, I want to try and make a point and compound the issue. With regards to Michigan kids loving Michigan apples, Scott has 3 apples, Joanne has 2 apples, and Paul, he doesn't know how many apples he has. And also their dog Toby is along with them. Now my question posed to you in this problem is, how many total apples Krista Scott, Joanne, and Paul have. Now, if you can answer that question, then you have a better understanding of the story problem than I do. And I use this to illustrate the problem we are facing with the MEEP test this year. Districts across the state cannot, at least 9 of them in this capacity, and specifically my district in Grand Rapids, cannot truly have representation and understanding of the MEEP scores to address the issues that face them. 1,000 test scores are lost in the Grand Rapids public schools. And just to compound the issue, at our highest achieving high school and middle school, only 1 test was returned. We all know here as committee members and chair, we spoke briefly earlier, that we face a critical issue with regards to the MEEP scores, and then in compliance with No Child Left Behind, as well as AYP and Education Yes, the report cards. So what I ask in my resolution is that, and I've spoken with the Department of Education here in the state, that we look at possible solutions and not to penalize any school district in the state of Michigan that is not in compliance with NCLB, and work out some type of resolution and a solution to this problem. We know that the test scores came back 6 months late. That already causes a problem. And as a former teacher and administrator in the Grand Rapids Public Schools, we see that this only compounds the issue that the test scores being late. 1,000 test scores are lost just in my district in Grand Rapids, and I believe there are an additional 8 other districts in the state of Michigan that have lost test scores as well. And at this time, working with our 2 software vendors, we haven't found, nor will they believe ever to be found, that these tests will be found to be at least incorporated into the results and the data. So briefly and in conclusion, I would just ask for your support for House Resolution number 116, just realizing that we don't penalize our school districts across the state because of the fault in not providing the data in a timely and accurate capacity. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any questions of the representative regarding the resolution itself? Representative Gillaham?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Representative Sack. Know that the MEEP in general has been an issue of broad concern for you. You attended our hearing out in Grand Rapids when the subcommittee met out there as we begin to look at and discuss some of the problems that we have, not only with MEEP, but as it relates to No Child Left Behind. Obviously, this is one of those issues, and I'd like to ask what your thoughts. You're a former educator. You kind of know how this process works. You've been looking at No Child Left Behind, I'm sure, for a while. Without the passage of this resolution, what do you think, understanding that the federal Department of Education has been extremely heavy-handed with the state of Michigan and some other issues of implementation, what do you think would likely be the net result if we weren't to pass this resolution? What would happen and what impact would it have on your local schools?
Well, my response to that is working with the Department of Education, Elaine Madigan, in ensuring that the No Child Left Behind and the representatives from the federal government, that specifically would address the issue, saying that we have representatives from the state of Michigan encouraging our federal and as well as our Michigan Department of Education not to penalize. So I'm hoping that they understand the predicament that we are in at no fault to the school districts primarily. And I'm not here once again, Representative and Mr. Chairman, to point fingers. We'll address that issue at a later date, but at the same time, we cannot hold these school districts accountable if we haven't given them accurate, timely data with regards to the results of the test scores to ensure that they can make informed decisions on how to progress and increase student achievement. So I'm hoping that they understand the situation that Michigan is in. I believe there may be a few other states that I have heard are in the same predicament, and working to a reasonable solution with regards to this issue.
Thank you. I just would like to note that our office has been in touch with DOE, and they have been very receptive, obviously, to, as you know, Representative, in working this out, making sure that these penalties aren't passed on. They have received, I believe, a letter outlining relief from the federal government in terms of adhering to No Child Left Behind with regard to this situation. And my understanding is they're all understand the issue, and they're working towards making sure that districts are not directly penalized, although again, Elaine Madigan is here with the department. I don't know if the department wants to make any specific statements on the issue if you'd like to. And at the same time, if members have questions of either DOE or Representative Sack, it would be good so we can move this item on. So we have two other issues. Thank you. I know, Elaine, if you'd like to make any comments first.
Sure. In a nutshell, we feel very strongly that we can't blame students or schools for the problems created by other adults, which is basically the situation here. The superintendent did have a conference call with all the districts involved yesterday, and they did decide they had to work together to reach some kind of a solution that they could all agree to. So that's where we are now.
Thank you. Committee questions, I believe Representative Meisner passes. Representative Stahl, do you have a question for either Ms. Madigan or the representative?
Yes. What's the answer to that problem?
Just briefly. I mean, it goes and compounds the point and tells you that you can't get an answer to that question. And it's the same thing that we can't get the information to the MEP results in making sure that it occurs.
Representative Spade, on your question, sir.
Well, Representative, I totally support your bill, but I do have to tell you there is an answer to that. The answer is 5 because Toby ate all Paul's, and we know that. So.
All set.
Any other questions from committee members on the resolution? Representative Hart.
I just wanted to thank Representative Sack for introducing this entirely appropriate resolution, and I'm sure your school district is very thankful for its introduction.
Representative Bradstreet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What happened that we have all these lost test scores? Is this the contractor that has lost them? Is that what's happened, or?
That's correct. The two software vendors, they've, I think, Chair Kuipers in the Senate Education Committee, and I believe also Representative Voorhees is holding a MEP town hall appointed by Chair Palmer, and I believe at this time these test scores were lost, and they both have taken somewhat of a responsibility, I believe, that have not made a final determination where they are, what happened, how it happened, but bottom line is those 1,000 test scores just in Grand Rapids are misplaced, lost, and it's kind of a belief that they will never be found, unfortunately.
Another reason that the MEP subcommittee or assessment subcommittee was formed, and that we are obviously very overdue in reforming our assessment and testing in Michigan at both primary and secondary levels. So the time is here. Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Ms. Madigan. And if there's no further questions on this issue, I think we can probably ask for a motion to report House Resolution 116 out with recommendation. Representative Vagnazzi, is that a motion or? That's a motion. Okay, very good. Not an no amendment. Okay, very good. Moved by Representative Vagnazzi. I ask the clerk for a roll call to report House Resolution 116 out.
To report out House Resolution 116H2 with recommendation, Representative Palmer.
Yes.
Representative Hummel.
Yes.
Representative Meyer.
Yes.
Representative Bradstreet.
Yes.
Representative Hager.
Yes.
Representative Hart.
Yes.
Representative Ruth Johnson. Yes. Representative Tabor. Representative Voorhees.
Yes.
Representative Vanderveen.
Yes.
Representative Knox.
Yes.
Representative Stahl.
Yes.
Representative Gilliam.
Yes.
Representative Vagnazzi.
Yes.
Representative Spade.
Yes.
Representative Smith. Representative Hopgood.
Yes.
Representative Meisner.
Yes.
Representative Clamp. Mr. Chair, you have 18 yeas, 0 nays, 0 passes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Representative, for bringing this resolution in, and thank you to the Department of Education. With that, we will move on to House Bill 5059, introduced by Representative Ward, which basically is a piece of legislation that would require instruction programs regarding the warning signs and risk factors of suicide and depression in our schools. This would be an amendment to the revised school code, and I think it's of great interest. I know there are a number of people that are here to testify on this issue today, and one I will personally introduce once we go through the testimony and presentation by Representative Ward. Just at this point, I'd like to ask Representative Ward to come on up and introduce his piece of legislation. And seems like I see you in a lot of different committees introducing legislation lately, Representative. And also, if you would introduce the individuals that are with you, Representative, appreciate it. And also like to welcome them to Lansing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I particularly want to thank you personally for taking up this piece of legislation. A very difficult topic, but a very important topic. House Bill 5059 requests and encourages local school districts to introduce curriculum that's age appropriate regarding the warning signs and risk factors for teenage suicide and depression. This bill was introduced out of a very tragic incident for a young man, Chase Edwards, 7th grader, very bright young man with a bright future ahead of him, took his own life earlier this year. In a meeting with Mr. Edwards in particular, who incidentally is one of the most courageous persons I've ever met, both Mr. and Mrs. Edwards are, they've found out a tremendous amount of information that needs to be shared with students, needs to be shared with teachers, parents, so that perhaps some of these tragedies in the future can be avoided. I would like to at this time turn it over to the Edwards so they can share some information with the committee if that's appropriate, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and I'd like to welcome the Edwards again to Lansing to testify, and greatly appreciate your courage and commitment to come forward to discuss this issue with us very much.
My son Chase liked apples, and he also had a dog named Frank, and he had a dog named Rose, and we would have liked for him to have been able to have an opportunity to have taken more kinds of meat tests, but unfortunately he won't be able to anymore. And for that reason, my wife and I regret the reasons, quite frankly, why we're here today. But that said, on behalf of my wife Laura and I and my family, we'd like to express our gratitude to Representative Ward for introducing House Bill number 5059 and for the committee for taking up the matter of protecting and educating our children, and in the process ourselves regarding the warning signs of youth depression and suicide. On February 23rd of this year, just over 6 months ago, while my wife and I were preparing Sunday dinner for our family, our son Chase, the youngest of our 4 children, locked the door of his bathroom and hung himself using the sleeve of his favorite sweatshirt. 8 days later, on March 3rd, his mother and I were left with no options but to remove him from life support. Chase was 12 years old. He was a 7th grader at Brighton's Maltby Middle School. On Sunday, February 23rd, Laura and I began to live the nightmare that all of us as parents could not even allow ourselves to contemplate. Laura and I being real-life examples of what people barely living with broken hearts look like. Investigating what could have possibly led our son to making the fateful choice that he made, we came to realize that what we were viewing as the normal machinations of a boy entering puberty were in fact the warning signs of youth depression. But unfortunately, despite our well-educated and higher socioeconomic status, we did not only not know, we didn't know we didn't know. Our knowledge of the warning signs of youth depression and suicide being an existential issue. Even more unfortunately than our ignorance, our son Chase didn't know what was wrong, why he was feeling the way he was feeling, or how or who to share his depression with. As we explored the matter further, querying the Michigan Department of Education and our local Brighton school system, what we discovered was that while education programs existed to teach our son about the chemical and physical changes he was experiencing for his developing sexuality, or the dangers associated with the numbing and mind-altering usage of drugs and alcohol, no educational elements or programs existed to address what 30% of kids under the age of 15 go through, and that being the chemical and physical changes prompting depression, or the reasons why over 65% of suicide victim autopsies reveal traces of alcohol or drug abuse. Even more tragic and disappointing for our research and investigation was the statistic that over 90% of suicides are preventable. In other words, had we all just been better educated and more aware of the warning signs of depression, our wonderful, caring, tender-hearted, artistic, athletic, handsome, popular, loving brother and son didn't have to die to let people know that something was wrong inside of him. Chase having chosen, unfortunately, a permanent solution to what was a temporary problem. As I'm sure you've seen here, these are some photographs of our son Chase. While we've taken on the personal responsibility of alerting and educating our local Brighton community to warning signs of depression through the memorial website that we've set up to our son, and I would encourage you to go there, it's chaseedwardsmemorial.com, or public speaking that we've done at churches and at youth groups, or the thousands of flyers that we have produced and disseminated, or might even want to grab the t-shirt, or the t-shirt that are ready to circulate as well. This being...
This is a piece of Chase did that we found later on in his room, and it's called The Hardest Goodbye.
We knew this was our son because of the little beaded choker that he had around his neck. He used to make and wear those. And so we've had these made up. And on the back it says, Chase was depressed, are you? And then it has the warning signs of depression and where people can call. So it's telling you as well. And again, while we've taken on some of the personal responsibility of alerting our community, we would ask and have the need for you and our fellow Michiganders to help to ensure that the news regarding the warning signs of youth depression and suicide are spread, and not on an optional basis. Our experience and that of others who have joined us here today, attesting to the fact that when it comes to the uncomfortable subject of depression and suicide, and the myths and stigmas associated with it, that school systems would prefer to ignore the topic in the hope that the problem might just go away. Michigan Department of Education's health model only recently containing a suggestion for the subject of youth depression to be addressed at the middle school level. We would implore the members of this committee to fashion Bill 5059 in such a way that age-appropriate education regarding the warning signs, help, and treatment options for youth depression and suicide be ensured for the sake of all of our children and the prevention of no more broken hearts. In honor of our son, Chase Michael Edwards, please vigorously chase youth depression and suicide. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards, for your, Mr. and Mrs. Edwards, for your testimony.
I would also like to make the committee aware that there are 3 other people here that are well qualified to address the subject as well, and at this point we would, want them to introduce themselves as well.
Okay, thank you very much, and we'll proceed with the additional testimony, and then if there are any questions for you or Mrs. Edwards, we'll come back.
Okay.
If that's okay, Representative Ward, is that fine? Just for the record, Elaine Madigan, again representing Michigan Department of Education, supports this bill, does not wish to speak. And also Louise Samowski with the MST is here also supporting the bill, not wishing to speak, but wanted to make sure that was on the record. And we have also here, we have 3 individuals. First, Glenda Everett with the Youth Suicide Prevention Group out of Romulus would like to speak for a few minutes on this issue. Ms. Everett, welcome to Lansing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I move one picture?
Sure.
I got my picture too. My name is Glenda Everett, and I live in Romulus. I'm here today because it was my youngest son. I'm a mom, I have 3 sons, but it was my youngest son, Jesse. When he was 14 years old, he decided to end his life November 30th, 1996. I have not seen Jesse in 2,515 days now, or had the opportunity to open his bedroom and kiss him goodbye in the morning. Jesse was an awesome son. There's not a parent that won't want Jesse as their own son. He had just started 9th grade at Truman High School. He only got to experience that high school experience for 3 months. Looking back on my son's pain, that's what I take into school systems now. For 5.5 years, I've been the executive director for Yellow Ribbon Youth Suicide Prevention Program for our state. And I share the pain that Jesse was in that I can look back on now and see through his grades, straight E's off the bat, for his first report card marking, headaches and stomach aches with ferocious bloody noses that would accompany the headaches. I was told after he died that they were high symptoms of depression. Jesse identifying, he had made a big collage, a big square collage, took a lot of time with it, and they were all musicians, and he's putting this up over his bed one day. I was told after he died that they were all musicians who had ended their life. My son was screaming out for me, but I didn't know what he was trying to tell me. To look back on a particular day, the day before Thanksgiving, 6 years ago, there were a lot of things that happened that day that, putting them all together, there's a lot of should-haves and could-haves on that day. I got a call from his first-hour teacher saying Jesse's a great kid, but he's not happy here in school. We came up with a plan on Monday after the holiday to get him some help. Jesse told 2 friends that day that he had a plan for Saturday, and they didn't say anything. To look at Jesse, he doesn't look the type. Or they didn't know what to do with that kind of information and where to go with that. Or maybe they were waiting for school to come back on Monday. Jesse was expelled, and I only found that letter this summer when I went through his things for the first time. It was suspended, I'm sorry, for that following Monday. The school on the top of the note said, 1 call to mother at 9 a.m. I was at work, so I didn't know he was suspended. Looking forward to that on Monday. There's a lot of things, the should-haves and could-haves. I am very appreciative of this bill passing to help me. My goal, you know, I have no credentials after my last name, but M-O-M, but I'm streetwise now in suicide. And as a parent and a community person, that's my job now. I believe my son has left me a huge job. And part of that job, I want to see and go into all the middle schools and high schools in Michigan. And when I started saying that, I had no idea how many there really were. It's a huge job. And when I leave, but I try to leave the information and bring about the awareness and saying that awful S word. But to set up something like this 5059 bill, there will be something in place, you know, that I will not have to keep coming back and getting the new 6th graders and talking to the new 9th graders. I will still continue to help educate and turn my son's pain into a gain through the education. You know, I don't want one more person to walk into a survivors of suicide group and say, only if we had known the signs. There were so many there. Today, I'm just very grateful that, given this opportunity, that I can share my son with you today also. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Everett. Are there any questions for Ms. Everett or the committee members? If not, thank you very much for coming. And obviously, this is an issue that involves communication and awareness on the part of parents and students and educators, all that will recognize these signs and take action rather than just avoiding this issue. Thank you very much. We also have Cheryl King with the University of Michigan Depression Center wishing to testify and who supports House Bill 5059. Welcome, Ms. King.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thanks for this opportunity to speak to you today. I'm going to speak to you as a mental health professional who has worked in the field of depression and suicide prevention for the past 20 years. My role as it relates to suicide prevention is I'm the director of the Child and Adolescent Depression Program at the University of Michigan, the chief psychologist in the Department of Psychiatry, and a past president of the American Association of Suicidology, which is made up of mental health professionals, scientists, and survivors of suicide, and is dedicated to understanding and preventing suicide. Just some comments in support of House Bill 5059. Suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death in adolescence, and it is a preventable tragedy. National surveys have been done in large schools, small schools, urban areas, rural areas, private and public schools. And about 1/4 of high school students in our nation report that they have seriously thought about killing themselves in the past year. That's 1/4 of our high school students. For some of these, their thoughts are serious and unrelenting, and they include actual plans for suicide. For some of them, the thoughts are more simmering, and they really don't come to the surface until there is some maybe shame experience, or they're under the influence, they experience a big loss, a breakup, and they have an impulsive action. And for some of them, the thoughts don't go further than the thoughts. Because suicidal thoughts are usually associated with depression, we think of depression as a target, something that we could identify to do something about it. We know that suicide risk includes other factors too, so that the depression in someone who's acutely suicidal is often exacerbated by alcohol or drug abuse, by aggressive impulsivity, or by very upsetting life events. But depression is usually somewhere in the equation, and depression is highly treatable. For instance, and I think this was mentioned, the large majority of youth who are struggling with a clinical depression will experience significant thoughts of suicide, and about 1/3 of them will actually make suicide attempts. And when we look at the lives of youth who have been lost to suicide, and we go through their medical records, their school records, and talk with their families, we learn that significant numbers did have a depression. So what are some of the gaps in the schools? I've had a chance to talk with lots of school personnel over the years. We do a lot of in-service training, talk with a lot of students and parents. There's 3 big gaps, and I think this bill really does begin to address it. One is that the teachers across the board tell us that they have had insufficient training and information about these problems to feel confident to go and say or do anything. The students sometimes, as we heard here with Glenda, they have actually heard something from a peer, from another student, but they don't realize that the thing to do is to go tell an adult who can do something about it, and that something will happen. And the other thing is that very often when the teachers go to a one-time workshop or an in-service training, they still say that it's very hard for them to take the step when they're concerned about a student to actually say anything. They don't want to tip the apple cart. Maybe there'll be stigma. Maybe the family will feel their child was singled out. Maybe in the school they'll say, why are you doing this? We don't have the support. You know, it's hard for them to take the step after they learn about the screening to do something about it. Yet the truth is that every parent, every teacher, and every student I've ever talked with who is a survivor of suicide, of one of their fellow students, a student that they're teaching, or their own child, just wishes that someone had said to them, we have a concern. Maybe we should look into it. Maybe we should put our heads together and see if we can do something. The chance to hear that someone was concerned, and the chance to just take a step, talk to the child about it, and see if they could get help. So I think what this bill does is gives us a chance to have age-appropriate instruction so that students know the warning signs. It's in that yellow sheet that we handed out. It's really, there are some clear guidelines for students of what to do when you see a friend or a peer who looks like they have these signs. And it would be great if we could also pair it with in-service training or curriculum for the teachers, because in the schools they're really interlocking, and it's nice to have the students and the teachers informed about these issues so that when a student comes to a teacher, there is some readiness to take action and support the student and do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. King. Any questions for Ms. King, Representative Hager?
Yes, thank you for this testimony, and also thank you to the others who have testified with this very compelling and heart-rendering information. Granted, there needs to be something done. I'm just wondering on us to be more specific as to how we could handle this. Now, I'm going to ask 2 or 3 questions here, some of which you have referred to. One, is there a model curriculum available that schools could use? And you've already addressed one of my questions, and that is the in-service training for teachers. Could you speak to a little bit about how teachers could integrate this into their curriculum? My guess is that you would not suggest that from 9:30 to 10 every Monday and Friday morning we're going to talk about suicide, that you would probably instead integrate this into the curriculum in some way. How could it be handled at the elementary level versus the departmentalization that takes place in middle school and high school? And also, maybe you could discuss a little bit about any legal ramifications for teachers who, some people, some parents might be concerned if, who are rather defensive and say, no, there's no problem with my kid. Those kinds of things. Could you just speak to those things, if you would, please?
First, I like the wording of this being age-appropriate instruction. I think what is most critical is that it is not a one-time lecture that happens somewhere between K and 12. What's important is that there is some continuity so that at different points, perhaps early, late elementary, some very initial information about mental health issues, the fact that some people really are depressed, there are treatments available. You get to middle school, it may be in more detail, more information, and again in high school. So it wouldn't be every Monday, but there might be something each year. And if that was complemented, and I think there are many options for how it's integrated, and that may vary by school district or by community in terms of their curriculum. If there's health classes in certain years, in other years there may be other classes where it could fit in. So how it's integrated may be less important than the fact that it is integrated across the curriculum in an age-appropriate manner. So it's not seen, for instance, you may have a 15-year-old who became acutely depressed and suicidal for the first time 8 weeks ago. So having covered this in a health class in 7th grade when he was 12 isn't going to help with this. So I think what's critical is it's integrated in multiple points across the curriculum in developmentally appropriate ways. There are models for this, and we could provide that information. I think there's different ways that it can be integrated, and we're not talking about an entire class or one teacher.
Thank you, Ms. King. Any other questions for Ms. Follow-up question, Representative Hager?
Yes, I was wondering, maybe before we take any action on this, I know that my school superintendents that I represent would be sympathetic to the cause, but wonder about the specifics. I recognize the fact that it's permissive legislation, but I would like to see some sample legislation at maybe 3 different levels, maybe elementary, middle school, and high school, so that we could share those with you. Talk about age appropriate. I think that's necessary, but what is age appropriate? So those are the kinds of things I'd like to see before we take further action.
Just as a follow-up to that, Representative, we do have another speaker who will be talking about programs, who has been involved nationally and internationally right after this. But also, I have talked with Representative Ward, and obviously we're not taking action now. I think the thought process is that that everybody put their heads together here, and we're looking at potentially making this bill more specific towards actually the implementation of a program and defining it, and secondly, that it is appropriate, and that however it is implemented, it's done appropriately within guidelines that the legislature would like, rather than kind of the general language that's in there right now. And I know that Representative Ward is very willing to work towards that goal. This can be a very important piece of legislation if we do it right, and so we are going to be taking our time and making sure we're doing it right. Ms. King, go ahead.
I could also address the second part of the question about the legal issue. I do think it is training for the students, training for the teachers, and there is a third critical piece, which is that the system is organized to respond. And I know there is a district in Michigan, and I'll have to look up the name, where they have put together what they call student study teams, so that if there is a child someone is concerned about, for instance, one of the teachers identifies risk, that the other adults in the system who interface with that child in classes come together and share that information and come up with a response plan, so that you don't have one teacher kind of left, having identified someone, not sure what can happen next in the school. And I think that's a healthy model for the families, the students involved, and for the school system.
Thank you, Ms. King. I think there might be one more question, Representative Agnazzi, before you leave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In talking to Japanese parents who reside in my district, in Japan, has a very high suicide rate, and they attribute it to the pressure that's put on the students to succeed, because I think their colleges depend on on your success rate in high school. Is that a major problem here in the United States?
The actual precipitants here in the U.S., I'm sure that stress is entering into the equation somewhere, but the actual precipitants are generally things that we cannot prevent because they're normative for all youth, and those are disciplinary crises and interpersonal loss or conflicts, breakups, losses, and disciplinary crises. This isn't where we put our prevention efforts, because I think we all experience these, and they tend to happen at this time and maybe throughout our life. But stress is a factor, but stress is something we really can't take away from their lives. And the actual academic pressure is not thought to be involved in as high a proportion of suicides in our nation as in Japan.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Representative.
Couple of questions, yeah. You're suggesting teacher training as being a very important factor of this.
Very.
And is this when they're at the school level, when they're teaching, or is this something that should be handled in their training in their colleges, or do we do this during professional development days?
My recommendation is all of the above.
Okay.
There really should be more training built into the curriculum of teachers, probably, but I don't think it's one-time training. I think even if it's built into the curriculum, it would be important to have regular in-service training of some kind.
Mm-hmm. And is there a liability issue for the teachers?
I am not aware of any liability issue related to training the teachers to be aware of mental health problems.
In carrying out the program.
There is, it is a myth that talking about suicide results in more suicidality. So, for instance, asking youth about suicide, they often will tell us what they've been thinking, but it turns out they have been thinking this all along, only they've been thinking it in silence, really living with it alone and not getting any help. But there's really no evidence to support the notion that we're making someone suicidal through any kind of suicide prevention or awareness training.
Thank you very much. Thank you again, Ms. King, for your testimony. Representative Clack?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the parents who testified, I'm truly sorry for your loss. Two concerns. One, suicide is too many with a child, and I know that. Have you done any research that shows demographics that it occurs perhaps in one section of our state or two more than others? Do you have any demographics and any numbers per year on suicide attempts or suicide?
What I do have is, I guess we are fortunate in Michigan, is not one of the states in our nation with the highest suicide rate. So that is something that can be said for our state. We're in the lower half, but each one is too many. In terms of demographics, the most powerful demographic factor in youth suicide is gender. Among adolescents, it is between 5 and 7 to 1, males to females, for completed suicide. So the powerful demographic is a gender one. Girls do make more attempts, but boys have many more completed suicides, much more likely. In terms of areas and regions in the state, it really doesn't know any socioeconomic or other bounds. It really crosses the state, rural, urban, lower and higher economic areas.
Thank you, Ms. King. We do have another individual who's going to be testifying that might respond to a lot of those questions. He's been at it, I know, for 30 years. I'd like to introduce Mr. Jim Tooman. Jim, if you'd come up and give you a little background. Jim's going to be talking for a few minutes on this issue. I asked Representative Ward to indulge because I felt when this issue was brought up, and having been aware of this issue myself for some time and following it, the man here sitting before you is probably, at least from my standpoint, the one that has been on the front line worldwide. He's probably, I think, one of the foremost individuals I know anywhere in the world regarding this issue. He's actually, they say a prophet isn't always recognized in his hometown. He actually comes from Royal Oak, Michigan, and Jim doesn't predict the future. He deals in reality. He's been at this for 30 years, has spoken to, I believe, over 2 million kids on this issue worldwide. He has went in countries from China, Japan, England, Germany, Canada, Mexico. He has been invited now. He's kind of going from the frontline arena into actually the development of programs, as Representative Hager brought up, regarding this issue, and has been invited to meet with, I believe, 21 world leaders around the country in different nations in terms of this suicide issue and how it relates to the breakdown of the families and what to do about it. Jim has has actually developed national programs around the country that are being utilized dealing with youth, women, and returning veterans on this issue, to not just our youngsters, and has appeared on everywhere from ABC, NBC, CBS, Oprah Winfrey, PM Magazine, etc., been in Newsweek, USA Today, New York Times, Washington Post, on and on. And has been involved in Japan in dealing with that issue specifically, Representative, regarding, and did a nationwide documentary show in Japan on this issue. Amongst other background issues, which he will generally not talk about, he was Michiganian of the Year, I believe, 2 years ago, I think, and has been recognized in this issue, particularly dealing with communities and schools. He has a couple other programs that he's developed. I would like to welcome Jim Tooman and thank him from the bottom of my heart for coming here today. He has given his life to this issue. He would give off, I can tell you for a fact, he would give the shirt off his back to help any kid at any time, and I've seen him do it. Thank you, Jim, for taking the time to come up here and to talk to our committee and those present.
Thank you, Representative Palmer. What was neglected to mention in somewhat of that lengthy introduction was that I was also a 7-letter athlete in high school. I was president of my class. I carried an A- average, and I also tried to take my life 3 times. 3 times. See, in my family, love was based on performance, and so the more I performed, the greater the love. And there was always that fear one day, what happens if I don't perform? Will there really be any love? And that was my challenge. And that sense of aloneness has transpired in kids virtually around the globe. That sense of isolation and aloneness, that lack of connectedness. Several months ago, I was sitting at my desk about 3:30 in the afternoon. I got a call from a parent of a 6-year-old who had just taken her life. 6 years old. Kids were picking on her at school. She came home, she told her mom and dad. Her mom and dad said, "It happened when I was in school. You go back, you're not staying home." She came back again and again and again, and by the 4th time, after being denied her and the inability to share her feelings, she came back. She was a latchkey kid for 10 minutes. And her mother thought she was in the backyard playing, went in the garage, climbed in the family car, shut the garage door down, turned on the ignition, and ironically enough, left a note. So any time that you thought that this was random, it wasn't random. 6 years old. I spoke at a school in New York City. Teacher got up. She had given her class an assignment to compare themselves to an inanimate object. This young man who was president of his class, he compared himself to a rubber band. He said, I am a rubber band. People pull at me, twist me, stretch me thin, then I'll break, but it'll be too late. That morning, his parents saw that paper on the kitchen table. At lunch, that young man shared that particular assignment with his friends. And that afternoon, turned it in to the teacher. No one caught the signs. And that night, this young man hung himself. This bill is not finite enough. This bill does not focus on all of the arenas affecting a young person's life. If we are to make any headway in this epidemic situation, because you see, if you're not scared, then well, you should be, because this is at epidemic proportions. And as I crisscross the country, I see more and more of the stories like the Edwards that are reaching people at an emotional level. But the challenge is, how do you hold the space? How do you get down to the nitty-gritty? There are 4 areas that affect a young person's life: their friends, their family, their teachers and educators, and the community at large. You leave one of these pieces out in terms of education, and that piece will come back to beat you. I spoke at Columbine after the shooting there. And there wasn't one person that did not say, we saw some signs in these 2 young men that walked into school that day. In USA Today, there's an article on school shootings and school violence. We are living in an at-risk population. There are programs out there that will meet some of these challenges. One of the foremost resides, the executive headquarters resides in Holland. It's Communities and Schools. It's a nationwide program that deals with encompassing all areas of a child's life and pulling coalition and community together to deal with specific at-risk problems in kids. There are effective models out there. But I'm asking you to look at the total person, because if you just focus on teacher training, if you just focus on peer involvement, then it will come back to beat you. It will come back to beat you. I can look out over your faces, and there are many of you out there who are parents. What would you give? And I know the Edwards would give everything that they owned on this earth. What would you give to hear that your son and daughter were thinking about taking their own lives before they did it? You'd give everything. Everything. In order to make that work, you have to create a safe environment in a community so a kid will step forward to tell you that they are thinking about taking their own lives before they do it. And that can only be accomplished by a young person feeling that there will not be repercussions. You mentioned about Japan. Japan has tremendous repercussions on young people that fail the test between high school and college. I've spoken in Japan 5 times. They lead the world in suicide. I do not want to see another kid fall through the cracks. I do not want to see another kid where they had a chance. I mean, we're battling against disease. This is a disease. I was surrounded by people in my life. I had all the accolades I could ever experience. And yet inside I felt alone. Inside I felt detached. And my best friend saved my life. He saw something was wrong, and he showed up at my house at midnight and knocked on my window as I was about to plan a premeditation of taking my life. And he said, "Jim, I love you. I'm asking you, whatever you're considering, to please reconsider." His intervention gave me some hope. His intervention of love gave me some opportunity and some promise. People need to be armed. They need to be armed with information. They need to understand the warning signs. They need to be, whole community needs to be in eyes and ears. When you see something out of order, then you need to know where to go. If we just leave it to school counselors, it's not going to work. They have a caseload beyond our comprehension. And kids will fall through the cracks. You have a chance to save lives in this room. I'm asking you to really take a look at what it will take to make that work. Questions?
Before we ask a few questions, I'd just like to point out a couple of articles I think that you have that were passed out that Jim provided me. One that indicated the close to 3 million Americans aged 12 to 17 considered suicide in 2000, and more than a third of those tried to kill themselves in that 12 to 17 area, in that arena, and that was in the year 2000. And I know Jim's analysis worldwide in other countries shows that I think it's 1 out of every 8 children worldwide have considered attempting suicide. I mean, these are staggering figures.
Representative, it didn't happen when I was in high school. For many of you sitting in chairs today, it didn't happen when we were in high school. Suicide was the abnorm and not the norm. And now the unfortunate thing is it's getting collective. Just a week ago in Iowa, 6 kids were going to do it together. I spoke at a high school near Kalamazoo. 4 students were in a car. They were football players, gang, highly visible in the school. They all decided they didn't want to go beyond high school without each other. They got into a car one night, and they were going to shoot a ravine. And they were all together in the car. And thank goodness one kid had the presence of mind to scream out as they were going 60 miles an hour to shoot this ravine, "I don't want to die." Otherwise, you'd have another tragedy. It's there. It's real. Tomorrow is my birthday, and I came up here specifically because I'm scared. I'm going to be 62 years old tomorrow, and I'm going to leave this earth. And I was hoping after this many years and this much passion that I would see it turn. It's worse.
Representative Stahl, I believe, had a question for you.
Yes, I would like to ask you, our culture is changing. The parameters of our principles and values that this country, this state was based on In Article 8, the education of our Constitution, it says religion, morality, and knowledge is a means for good government and happiness. I can't quote the rest of it verbatim, for the citizens of the government. And I've seen in my lifetime, I've seen us come in a culture from where there used to be prayer in the schools. There used to be a hope beyond ourselves. There used to be a purpose that was allowed to be discussed. And I'd just like to have your feeling on, as we try to take God and remove God more and more out of government, more and more out of the schools, and saying that we're in a process of evolution and that we can't even consider the creation theory in the schools. Do you think this has a part also in our society, also in our culture? Just not specific, just maybe in generalities?
Anything that will give us hope, anything where a young person can hang on to something that's not going to be elusive, is tangible in grounding a kid. Anything. I was the keynote speaker at the 9/11 commemorative a year ago in September. 2 of my high school friends had died in that World Trade. That morning, one of them had an angry, rageful fight with his son. Called his son a loser, said his son's never going to amount to anything, and left to go to work, never came back. He left his son $3 million. His son has attempted to take his life on 4 occasions already since then. Anything that will give a young person hope to hang on to, I will concur. But they don't feel safe. Kids do not feel safe. They don't feel safe in home. They don't feel safe in school. They don't feel safe in their community. They don't feel safe to be themselves. There was an interesting study that you should pull up. It was in the Utica schools. It's a drug and alcohol study. It was done a number of years ago, and they asked kids one question that jumps out at me. Where would you go for help if you were hurting? Probably 90% of grade 8 said their friends, 96% of grade 10 said their friends, and almost 100% of grade 12 said their friends. Teachers and counselors were, unfortunately, 5th and 6th. A drug clinic was number 2. They don't feel safe.
Representative Meisner, I believe, the question.
Thank you. First off, to the Edwards and to Glenda, I want to thank you so much for coming here and sharing your story. I think it's so important and it's just critical, I think, in terms of reducing stigma and making the important point that you do, that this is a problem that really transcends demographics, and I think that's important. Representative Ward, I would really like to commend you for your leadership on this issue. Just very thoughtful and so important. I first experienced suicide in my family. I was 8 years old when my father attempted suicide, and so it's a very personal issue for me, and really appreciate you guys having the courage to come out and talk about it. Sir, you referenced substance abuse. I'm sure that all my colleagues will enthusiastically support this measure and in some form, and any other measure that we can to try to address this issue. I think it's important to note, in addition to trying to seek protective factors for suicide, you mentioned substance abuse. Are there other risk factors out there, other behaviors that we're trying to prevent that benefit from our focus on preventing suicide and addressing depression?
Representative Meisner, and I'm hoping all of you will heed some of this. I'm really asking you to look at this. So many of these issues are They're symptoms. They're symptoms of a larger problem. And this larger problem exists because I go back to the same concept. How do you get kids to feel safe? How do you feel safe? Let me ask you a question, all of you, because this is so pertinent in resolving this. Raise your hand in the room if you have a best friend. Raise your hand in the room if you have a best friend. All right? Now, just free for all out there, tell me what makes that person a best friend to you. Anybody? Acceptance? Anyone else? Loyalty? Love? Anyone else? What makes that person a best friend? Availability? Trust? Okay? If you asked every age that same question, and I know because I've asked it, they'll to the letter say exactly the same thing. So what they're asking for is what all of us are asking for. We're asking for an opportunity in our home life to feel unconditional love. I've said this so often to parents. The greatest gift you can give as a parent is, no matter how badly your son or daughter screws up in life, that they know they can always come home. And so what I'm saying to all of you is, when you look at these issues, if you pinpoint symptoms and address the symptoms, something else, another fire will open up. So if you look at a total picture, that's why I'm saying there are models out there, like Communities in Schools is such a strong model. It's a coalition model in communities. It's in 38 states. And it's probably, in my mind, the finest program that is out there addressing issues of at-risk kids, and needs to be looked at in terms of what is the program, how does it work, and maybe how can we duplicate it in some of the communities. It's now in about 20 communities in the state of Michigan. But it operates on a coalition concept. There's a program I developed in Zealand that's now 8 years old that addresses where all the factions of Zealand come together and they look at kids' issues. And so that one area is in concert with the other, and everybody works collectively together to make this, focus on whatever the problem is. They all operate in sync with each other. It'd be like in your homes, if you said one thing to your son or daughter and your spouse said something else to your son or daughter, what would your son or daughter think? Hey, I'm either going to manipulate one or I'm not going to believe either one. So what I'm saying to you is we have to work in concert to make this a reality of alleviating some of these problems, because otherwise we're handing off. I'm leaving on a world tour. I was supposed to meet with the president of Greece in August. My mom passed away, but I'm leaving in January, and I'm going to these 21 countries, and I'm going to talk about this model, and I'm going to talk about coalition, and I'm going to talk about community, and I'm going to talk about their whole concept of a total kid, a wraparound concept for a kid.
Representative Agnazian, your question?
Yeah, I think you mentioned browbeating. There is a bill, I don't know where it's at, but it attempts to deal with that problem. Is that something that we should also adopt in addition to this bill? Trying to, I know you're not going to eliminate browbeating and picking one student picking other students, but if it would do a little good, is that something that we should also add to this formula?
Absolutely. I mean, here's a reality for all of you. Kids in pain are difficult to teach. Every day a kid comes to school with a different issue from their home life. It could be a substance abuse issue. It could be a drug issue. It could be, a browbeating issue. It could be, all kinds of issues. And if you look at the total kid and address the total kid, and as I said, there are programs out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are programs out there that are working, that are looking at this, because they figured it out a long time ago that if you put out one fire, another fire opens up. They needed to be able to make sure that there was a fire drill for every kid. I mean, the Edwards who came here today to share their hearts with you, there is a tragedy that could have been prevented. And if it happened to one of your children, and you were sitting here, you'd be just as passionate and just as committed as they were, and you would champion this. And so here's a challenge for all of you. In every community in the state of Michigan, there's a champion. There is a person who, like the Edwards, who have had a challenge. You find those champions in these communities, and you pull them together, and you let them be a voice of reason, and you let them talk about some of the challenges that they have. But equally important, you allow kids, because we don't listen to kids, you allow kids to have a voice. I started a program, a kid came to me, he had killed his best friend driving drunk. And he came to me, called me from jail. I was the first call that he made. And I got this idea that he could go into schools and talk to other kids about issues that I couldn't talk about, even though, as you see, I'm really passionate about this. But he could address it on a peer-to-peer level that would impact lives. Some of the champions in these communities are the kids themselves, who have conquered a program, who have gone through the pain, who have been down to the bottom and have come up. They need to be voices too.
One last question, Representative Meisner. I think we're going to wrap up this portion.
Just
of
with regard to programs, I was wondering if you've heard of Challenge Day. It's kind of a bullying and just a quick professional critique of that program, if you have one.
My knowledge of it, I would never go on record until I did a lot more research. So forgive me for, I'm not being evasive. I just have to be honest with you and fair on that basis.
I'd like to, one question, Representative Tabor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very, very moving. I went to an interesting workshop one time at a conference. It was called, it had to do with education, and it was a presentation. It was called Jack and the Giant School. And this was not too much longer after Columbine took place, and that was, certainly in the public's eye at the time. In your opinion, do you think that that could be, although there's a lot of factors here that contribute to someone wanting to take their own life, but in your opinion, do you think that that could be something that's made the situation worse, where perhaps our schools have gotten too big? And I know there are some districts throughout the nation that are experimenting with breaking their school buildings down into pods or separate schools within the same building, where the kids feel a little bit more like they belong, they get to know their teachers a little bit better, they get a little more one-on-one, and perhaps even socially they're more exposed to stronger friendships, perhaps, instead of feeling like they're more a number instead of a name. Do you think that has anything to do with this at all?
You guys want to see what a school is really all about? Spend time, Representative Tabor, spend time in a lunchroom. You will see an entire school unfold before your eyes. You will see the power groups, the wannabes, the loners, and it has nothing to do with size. It has to do with a division within the school where a kid does not feel like they're infused into, a total school environment. So size obviously has some criteria to that, but it's still a division. I mean, every one of us in this room faced, our own peer pressures and our own, peer groups that were the popular groups, and we wanted to be in those, and we wanted to fit in, and every kid, and I have said this so often that, ad nauseum, that a kid in many cases will consider taking their lives as opposed to not being able to fit in. And so these are critical issues to address. And I urge you to create a focus group for this committee of kids that on periodic basis come up and will give you insights and groundedness in a school environment so that you can make intelligent choices about kids' issues. And I will support that. I will help you. I will get you the kids. I will do whatever it takes to make this work. And then I ask you to look at existing programs like communities and schools that I mentioned and see if it fits for some of the ideas and some of the bills and some of the programs that you're trying to develop.
Thank you, Jim, for your testimony. Appreciate it very much. I know we'd probably like to be here longer. Again, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to come up and to share that your experiences. And I would like to also thank Representative Ward for introducing this piece of legislation that obviously is greatly needed. And I'm sure we'll be working together towards developing a finite component to this bill. And I know you'll be working with Ms. King, Everett, and Mr. Tooman, others out there that have had the background to see what's working, what's not working. And I know this community schools program is one I think that would be great to look at what could be tied into a piece of legislation. So I know in the hopefully in the coming days and weeks we'll be working together on that. And I'd like to thank you again. I think you've got everybody's attention here. And thank you again, the Edwards, for taking the time and having the courage to come down and testify before us today, and Ms. King and Ms. Everett. I'd also like to mention that Ellen Hoekstra does support, I believe, supports this legislation, does not want to testify with the Michigan Association of School Social Workers and Association of School Psychologists. Is that correct? You do support it? Okay. With that, we're going to be moving on to the next agenda item, but thank you very much. In the interest of time, what we're going to do is, regarding Senator Cropsey's bill, Senate Bill 366, hopefully we can get into some initial discussion. Is there someone here representing Senator Cropsey that still here that would like to discuss this bill? Okay. And again, we will not be voting on this. Senate Bill 366, introduced by Senator Cropsey, basically discusses the mandatory professional development requirements and some changes that are being recommended. With that, if you introduce yourself, please, and maybe we can at least have an outline of the bill, and then we'll pick it up, obviously, at our next meeting, either a special meeting or a regular meeting.
Sure. Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Ann Blankenhorn. I work in the Senate Majority Policy Office, and I'm here on behalf of Senator Cropsey. What the bill does is it removes the mandate that school districts provide 5 days of professional development for every teacher every year, and the 15 days in addition to that for new teachers in the first 3 years of their job. We had a series of hearings over in the Senate asking superintendents as to what ways we could help them cut costs, and this was one that was mentioned over and over again as a possibility, and so we drew up this legislation and went with it. I'm open for any questions.
Okay. With that, I'd just like to note for the record here, while we've got a chance to that Gene Doss is here representing the Association of School Counselors, not wishing to speak, opposes the bill. Don Truba here representing Michigan Association of School Boards, does not wish to speak, opposes the bill. Don Ohlendorf, representing the Michigan Small Rural Schools, does not wish to speak, opposes the bill, as does Nancy Stanley with the MASP, Michigan Association of School Administrators, not wishing to speak and opposes the bill. There are others that do want to speak, but at this point, I guess questions first as to the content of the bill by committee members to Senator Cropsey's office. Representative Meisner?
What's the anticipated cost savings?
Well, there are different figures that different organizations or entities have come up with. 17 million was House Fiscal's estimate, but that had just to do with the cost of substitute teachers. And there was a national study done on professional development costs around the country. It came up with 3% of operating expenditures as the average amount that it would cost to provide professional development around the country. And 3% of Michigan's cost, now I don't have the the exact year in front of me, but a couple of years ago, was about $294 million. So that it depends on where you're looking and what source gives you the information. There was another estimate that just took into account the salaries of teachers that would be getting the professional development. That was done by MVU, and I think that was about $35 million. So there are different figures that have come about.
Obviously, the representative depends on the assumptions here, but we've had them range exactly 17 million in the House, 35 the Senate fiscal, to Ann Blankenhorn's analysis, which was higher than that substantially. I think 100 and some million, and then
near 300 million.
And then Senator Kuiper's office had come up with numbers that. So I mean, there's quite a range depending on the assumptions, but there's obviously dollars here at that potentially could be on the table. Questions from committee members at this point, and obviously we're going to have a lot more testimony at this in the next meeting. Representative Tabor.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So who pays for this further, I guess, continuing education? Does the teacher?
Well, it could be negotiated in the contract. We're not saying that that the districts cannot provide the professional development. It would be probably negotiated in the contract.
Okay, so it'd be up to the local school boards and the...
Yes.
Okay.
And I think the main point here is really it gives school districts flexibility that they don't have right now. If they have a veteran teacher who really may not need the professional development, that teacher has to have it anyway. Mm-hmm. And so that money could go better towards another teacher who might need it more, or more than 5 days, so that all teachers are better prepared.
And if I may, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
When do the teachers usually put these days in? During the school year or during the summer? Or?
It varies. It could be either. But I think it's normally during the school year. Sometimes they will stop school sessions to do it, and sometimes they'll get substitute teachers to fill in and continue with the school instruction.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Representative Gilliam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a real simple question. You were here for the testimony on the previous bill, weren't you?
Which previous bill would that be?
The one that was talking about the importance of teacher training so they can recognize the signs of child or children that are at risk.
Yes, I was here.
Okay, thanks.
And I'd like to state that this doesn't disallow that. It allows a district to choose what is most important for their teachers.
Representative Vagnazzi has a question.
Yeah, I wonder, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It seems that at least the major administrative groups, the school boards and the administrators, are opposed to this bill. Where does the need to cut this program out come from?
It came from a series of hearings that we had over in the Senate where we asked school board members and superintendents to come and testify. And over again, this was one issue that was repeated. And I can't speak for Nancy Stanley if she'd want to speak for herself, but we did get it from the superintendents.
But my superintendents in my area are opposed to it. We heard that the state organization of superintendents, administrators was opposed to it, and that the school board association was opposed to it. So where is the need or the pressure coming for this legislation?
Again, we received the information from superintendents who testified from around the state that this was something that they requested.
Representative Clack on your question.
Thank you. To Representative Tabor, rarely, through the chair, forgive me, through the chair, rarely are substitutes needed for this kind of in-service, which is invaluable. Oftentimes, these days are built in at the beginning, early August even, in many districts where the children aren't in school, but the teachers are brought in for in-service. And then sometimes during the year, usually there is an in-service day built in, rarely, maybe 2 or 1, so it's not a hardship on the children. But most of the time they're built in at the beginning of the school year. And believe me, there are issues that are brought up in continuing learning, technology, information is given, and all kinds of issues come up during the year that it really makes the in-service sessions invaluable to teachers. Simple things like knowing what to do with the new grading systems. You just can't say at the end of the day, let's take 20 minutes to do that, especially when you bring people of expertise in to show you how to correctly conform to the whatever is being introduced in your district. So it's really invaluable. I would hate to think we would eliminate those days.
Representative Tabor, and your question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go back to our bill sponsor staff person. It's my understanding that this bill would not eliminate that.
I was
the
just going to
district
say that.
would
Thank
still
you.
be flexible to have those in-service days, which I am familiar with.
Yep.
Because generally the school district that my sons attend, we're told about these in-service days ahead of time. We know they're coming. And of course the kids love them because they don't have to go to school. But
Right.
I appreciate, Mr. Chair, the representative's comments. I'm familiar with the in-service days, but I just want to confirm this bill does not eliminate that.
That's right, and that was never the goal. The goal was never to eliminate professional development at all.
Very good.
And we do realize that No Child Left Behind does require it, and this has language in it that complies with No Child Left Behind. So I think some people may be interpreting the goal of this as that we don't want professional development, that we don't think it's good. That's not true. And that's why I mentioned the fact that some teachers may need it more than others, and now districts will have the flexibility to provide it that they don't have currently.
Thank you. I believe that's, I believe it's in our analysis now, but I think it should be emphasized that the bill basically removes the blanket mandate that requires teachers to receive this development, and it gives flexibility to school districts and public school academies to adjust and direct professional development where they see fit. So it's a local control bill allowing local districts to determine this goal and how they want to use it. And again, No Child Left Behind applies regardless, and the AYP standards are very important as to how far this can be utilized, both for regarding Title I and Title II money. So, other questions? Representative Gilliam?
In response to that, Mr. Chairman, I just want to point out that this is not the first time that I've seen this type of bill or this type of argument put forward. This is a local control issue. This is increasing flexibility. This is increasing our ability at the local level to make decisions. But what it essentially boils down to is that we don't mandate it, we don't pay for it. We heard testimony from the previous speakers on the previous bill that it is so important and it is so essential and crucial that teachers have continuing education. We want the people that have the most amount of skills necessary to be the ones that are interacting with our kids in the classroom. Yet if we don't require anything, then we really don't have to provide anything. And that's in a sense what we're dealing with here. We saw it with the special education rules, and we said we need to enact more flexibility and we need to streamline our system to the requirements of the federal government. Well, the federal government didn't require much. Michigan went over and above what the federal government required, and we did so because it was the right thing to do. I think here, with the issue of professional development, what we require is the right thing to do.
Thank you, Representative. Again, obviously, regardless of 366, the districts have got to comply with the development requirements, professional development requirements of No Child Left Behind, and which means that the districts must meet AYP or they're mandated to spend a portion of the Title I money on professional development. This doesn't affect that, and may have to use some of their Title II money. So I believe it's what I think if districts fail to meet AYP for 2 years, they're required to spend, I think, at least 10% of their Title I funds for professional development as well. So I mean, those are in place. This doesn't affect any of that. Any other questions from members? Obviously, we'll be continuing this discussion at our next meeting. Representative Vagnazzi?
Just a brief comment, but No Child Left Behind left the money behind, and that's a problem.
There is federal Title I and Title II money out there that we get. So, thank you. Any other questions? If not, I guess we'll end this part of the discussion. I will just like to note that those wishing to testify, which we can continue at the next meeting, are Elaine Madigan with MDOE, Linda Myers with the MEA, and Louise Samolsky with MFT. All, again, opposing the bill that would like to discuss it. So with your indulgence, so we can pick this up at our next meeting. Thank you for your patience. I believe we've covered the minutes. Absences to be excused. Do I have a motion to excuse?
No, we're all here.
We're all here? I guess not necessary. With that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.